The fog was still sitting low over the delta when my phone lit up on the nightstand in my hotel room in Osaka. I remember the light more than the sound. That pale blue rectangle against the ceiling, pulsing twice, then going still. Outside the window, the city was already moving. Taxis, bicycle bells, the compressed hiss of a train somewhere below, and I lay there for a moment in that particular kind of quiet that only exists when you are very far from home and something is about to change. I picked up the phone. The notification was from my attorney, Renata Flores. Not a call. A forwarded document, flagged urgent, time-stamped 11:47 p.m. Pacific. Which meant she had sent it the moment it crossed her desk, which meant she had been waiting for it, which meant she had known it was coming before I did. I sat up slowly. I set the phone face down on the sheet beside me. I counted the ceiling tiles the way my grandmother Delilah used to count her rosary beads when she needed to think without feeling. One at a time, each one its own small anchor. Then I picked the phone back up and read the document. My husband, Wade Calloway, had filed for divorce. He had filed 3 days earlier, while I was in the middle of a supplier negotiation in Kyoto. He had done it quietly, through his own attorney, without a single prior conversation, without a warning message, without even the courtesy of a text. The petition cited irreconcilable differences. It was clean and brief and written in the kind of language that has already moved past the emotional part and arrived at the transactional one. Attached to Renata's message was a second document. A screenshot of a post Wade had made on his personal social media account, public, visible to everyone we had ever known in Sacramento. In the post, he was standing in what I recognized as the kitchen of a house in Elk Grove, a house I had never been inside, with his arm around a woman named Priya, and in her arms was an infant. The caption read, "New chapter. New life. Finally free." The post had been up for 6 hours. It had 214 likes. Several of them were from people who had attended our wedding. I read the caption twice. I looked at the photograph for a long time. Then I opened Renata's message, typed 2 words, "I see it," and set the phone on the nightstand again. I did not call Wade. I did not type his name into the search bar. I did not draft a reply in the Notes app and delete it, which is something I had done before in smaller crises when I needed to feel the shape of words I would never send. I lay back down on the hotel pillow, and I looked at the ceiling, and something went still in my chest. Not the weight I had been bracing for, not yet, something closer to a door closing on its own. I had been married to Wade Calloway for 6 years. I should tell you who I was before Wade, because that is the part of the story that matters most, and the part he never bothered to understand. My name is Sawyer Calloway, Sawyer Brandt before the marriage, and I have already decided what it will be after. I am 34 years old. I was born in Natchitoches, Louisiana, and raised in a house that smelled like cedar and iron and the particular sweetness of muscadine grapes fermenting in late August. My grandmother Delilah raised me after my mother left, and my father decided that leaving was easier than staying. Delilah had strong hands and a quiet voice, and she believed, with the kind of certainty that doesn't require an argument, that a woman who understands the value of what she owns will never be made to beg for what she is owed. She died when I was 22 during my last semester of business school at Tulane. She left me 3 things: a small savings account containing $14,000, a handwritten letter sealed in a brown envelope and addressed to me in her looping script, and the name of a property attorney in Sacramento named Gerald Fitch, whom she had apparently been corresponding with for 11 years without ever mentioning it to me. I read the letter on the flight to California. It told me about the land. Delilah's older brother, a man named Cresswell Brandt who had moved to the Sacramento Valley in 1961, had purchased 42 acres of farmland outside the city limits. When Cresswell died in 1987, the land transferred to Delilah in a will that had never been probated because no one in the family had known it existed. Delilah had known. She had spent the better part of a decade working with Gerald Fitch to quietly resolve the title, clear the liens from Cresswell's creditors, and establish clean ownership. By the time she finished, the land was worth considerably more than when Cresswell had bought it. By the time she gave it to me, it was worth more still. The letter said, "This is yours alone. Keep it that way." I met Wade 8 months later at a trade conference in San Francisco. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming, completely, effortlessly, in a way that makes you feel chosen. He told me he was in real estate development. He was. He was also in the early stages of what would become a decade-long pattern of spending more than he earned and borrowing the difference from people who trusted him. I did not know that yet. We dated for a year. We got engaged. 3 weeks before the wedding, I drove to Gerald Fitch's office in Sacramento and sat across from him at a wide oak desk and told him I wanted to put the land into a separate property trust before the marriage, structured so that it could not be commingled, could not be accessed jointly, and could not appear as a marital asset in any future proceeding. Gerald had expected this. Delilah, apparently, had told him to expect it. He had the documents drafted and waiting. I signed them on a Tuesday. I got married on a Saturday. I never told Wade about the land. Not because I was planning for failure. Because Delilah had told me, "What you keep to yourself is the only thing no one can take from you in a hurry." The 6 years of the marriage are not a story about a bad man who was always bad. That would be easier to tell and easier to carry. Wade was generous in the early years. He was funny. He remembered things, the name of my favorite coffee place in the French Quarter, the way I take my tea, the song that was playing on a road trip we took to Big Sur 2 months after we started dating. He had a gift for making ordinary evenings feel deliberate and warm. The pattern started slowly, the way patterns always do, which is to say it started in a way that I kept finding reasonable explanations for. The first time Wade borrowed money from our joint account without telling me, the amount was $8,000. He told me about it afterward, framed as a bridge loan to himself, and he replaced it within 6 weeks, and I let it pass because the explanation was plausible and the marriage was young and I was not yet in the habit of noticing what I was choosing to overlook. By the 3rd year, the amounts were larger and the explanations were shorter. A development deal that needed a capital infusion. A partner who had pulled out at the last moment. A contractual obligation that had come due faster than anticipated. Wade spoke about money the way some people speak about weather, as something that happened to him, something external and unpredictable, something that would eventually improve if he waited long enough. By the 4th year, I had started keeping separate records. Not because I was planning anything. Because numbers, unlike people, do not revise themselves to be more comfortable. I kept a folder, paper, in a locked drawer in my home office, where I tracked the withdrawals, the dates, the stated reasons, and the actual amounts that were replaced versus the amounts promised. The gap between those 2 columns grew steadily across 31 months. I did not confront Wade about the folder. I did not confront him about the gap. I added rows to it the way Delilah had added beads to her rosary. Quietly, systematically, without drama. The 4th year was also when I first heard Priya's name. I heard it the way you hear a name that doesn't belong in a sentence. Not dramatically, not as a confession, but tucked inside a story Wade told at dinner about a client meeting that had run long, and then again 6 weeks later in a text notification I wasn't meant to see, and then a 3rd time in a voicemail I heard by accident because Wade had left his phone on the kitchen counter and stepped outside and the speaker was loud. The voicemail was not explicit. It didn't need to be. The particular register of a voice that believes it is private is a language anyone can read. I did not say Priya's name to Wade. I added it to the folder. By year 5, I had also spoken to Renata Flores for the first time. Not about a divorce, not yet, not as an immediate action, but as a conversation about what a person in my position would want to have in order. What documentation? What account structures? What the relevant statutes said about separately held property in California and what it would take to establish, in any future proceeding, that what was mine had been mine from before the first day. The office was on the 14th floor of a building on K Street, with a window that looked west toward the river. Renata was younger than I expected. Early 40s, with reading glasses she kept taking off and putting back on as she reviewed documents, and a habit of going very quiet before she said anything important. We sat across from each other for 2 hours that first afternoon. She asked careful questions and I gave her careful answers, and at no point did either of us use the word divorce, because that was not what the conversation was about. The conversation was about precision. About making sure that what I owned could be verified to have always been mine. She had asked, at the end, "Does he know any of this exists?" "No," I said. She had nodded, slowly, and written something in her notepad that I didn't try to read. I had driven home that evening through the Sacramento rush, windows down, the valley heat still sitting in the air at 6:30, and I had thought about Delilah. about the way she used to say that the most important decisions a woman makes are the ones she makes before she needs to make them. I had thought about the document I had signed on a Tuesday 3 weeks before my wedding. I had thought about the gap in the folder, now spanning 22 months. I had thought, I am not planning for failure. I am planning for clarity. Renata had reviewed the trust documents Delilah had given me the money to protect. She had looked at them for a long time. Then she had looked at me and said, "Whoever set this up knew exactly what she was doing." "She did," I said. By year 6, the land's appraised value had reached $1.2 million. A commercial development firm had approached Gerald Fitch about a long-term lease option on 30 of the 42 acres. I had been in discussions with them for 4 months. Wade did not know the land existed. He did not know about Gerald. He did not know about Renata. He did not know about the folder. He knew I traveled frequently for work. I ran the West Coast sourcing division for a mid-sized import firm, which required quarterly trips to Japan, South Korea, and occasionally Vietnam. He had stopped asking about the trips in detail sometime in year 4. By year 6, he occasionally forgot which country I was in. In year 5, he had asked once, offhandedly, why I kept my laptop password protected at home. I told him it was a company security policy. He accepted this without a follow-up question. That was the thing about Wade. By year 5, he had developed an incuriosity about me that had its own specific texture, different from indifference and different from trust. It was the incuriosity of a man who had already decided what he needed to know and had stopped looking for anything that might revise that picture. I noted it. I did not say it. The sourcing trip to Japan had been scheduled for 3 weeks. I left on a Sunday. Wade drove me to the airport, which he had not done in over a year. He was in a good mood, the kind of good mood that, by year 6, I had learned to read as a specific type of relief, the kind that belongs to a person who has recently made a decision and has not yet had to live with it. He kissed me at the curb. He said to text when I landed. I said I would. The first week in Japan was routine. Supplier meetings in Kyoto, a factory audit in Osaka, a dinner with a distribution partner in Kobe that ran 3 hours longer than expected. I texted Wade twice. He replied once, briefly. I noted the gap and did not remark on it. The second week was when Renata's message arrived. I lay in the hotel room until the sky outside began to lighten. Then I got up, showered, dressed, and went down to the hotel restaurant and ordered green tea and a bowl of rice and ate it looking out at the street below, where the morning was already organized and unhurried. A man was sweeping the sidewalk in front of the building across the way. A woman was adjusting the awning over a small shop. The ordinary motions of a morning. I thought about the specific pressure of Delilah's hands on my shoulders the week I graduated from Tulane, and the letter she had written me in her looping script, and the name Gerald Fitch, which I had not known before I opened that envelope on the flight west. I thought about the Tuesday I had signed the trust documents, and the Saturday I had gotten married, and the 3 weeks of ordinary life that separated those 2 days. I thought about the 31 months of the folder. The gap between the promised column and the replaced column. The voicemail I had not been meant to hear. The public post with 214 likes and the caption that said "finally free." I opened my phone. I typed Wade's name into the message thread. I typed one word. All right. I put the phone face down on the table. I finished my tea. I did not look at the phone again for 40 minutes. When I picked it up, there were 11 messages from Wade. The first confused, the second alarmed, the third and fourth attempting to walk back the post as a misunderstanding, the 5th through 9th increasingly urgent, the 10th and 11th simply reading "call me" and then "Sawyer, call me right now." I did not call him. I forwarded the thread to Renata with a 3-word message: proceed as discussed. Then I went upstairs, opened my laptop, and sent Gerald Fitch a separate message, referencing the lease option that had been pending for 4 months. You can move forward on the Elk Grove parcel, I wrote. All 30 acres. Execute at your discretion. I closed the laptop. I picked up my itinerary for the day. I had a supplier meeting at 9. I was not late. Wade called 47 times over the next 3 days. I know the exact number because I counted them later, looking at the call log, the way I used to count entries in the folder. Not out of any need to watch it register, just out of the habit of noting what the numbers actually said. 47 calls over 72 hours. No voicemails after the 8th one when he had apparently run out of new things to say and began repeating himself. 17 texts, declining in coherence from the first to the last. I replied to none of them. The work in those final Osaka days had its own kind of steadiness. I had spent years building the sourcing relationships that made these trips productive, learning the particular courtesies of each supplier, the right register for a negotiation, the moments when silence was more useful than a counteroffer. I had built that knowledge the same way I had built everything else that mattered. Slowly, without announcing it, in increments no single person would have thought to track. The audit I completed on day 3 was the cleanest I had filed in 4 years. The factory manager had shaken my hand and said something to his assistant in Japanese, and the assistant had translated. She works like someone who does not waste what she has been given. I thanked him and wrote the phrase down in the small notebook I carried because some sentences are worth keeping exactly as they are. On the 4th day, I called Renata. "He's retained Gareth Pulver," she said without preamble. I recognized the name. Sacramento family law, aggressive, known for discovery motions that were thorough to the point of being exhausting. Wade had done his homework, or someone had done it for him. "He'll go looking," I said. "He will," Renata said. "We're ready for him to look." There was a pause. Outside my hotel window, a crow landed on the fire escape railing and looked directly at me for a long moment before flying off. "Sawyer," Renata said, "how are you doing?" It was not quite a question. Renata had a way of asking things that left space for a real answer without demanding one. Something tightened briefly behind my sternum. Not the finality I had been bracing for, not the clean end of a finished marriage, but something smaller and more specific. The memory of the road trip to Big Sur, the song that was playing, the way Wade had looked at me at a rest stop outside Carmel when he thought I wasn't watching. The version of him that had existed before the pattern. "I'm fine," I said. "Okay," she said. And she left it there, which was the right thing to do. "Tell me about the trust," I said. "Gerald's documents are airtight," she said. "The separate property designation predates the marriage by 3 weeks, execution was witnessed and notarized, and there's been zero commingling, not a single transaction in 6 years that touched both the trust account and a joint account. Pulver is going to look for it, and he's not going to find a thread to pull." "And the lease agreement?" "Gerald executed this morning. 30 acres, 12-year term, $94,000 annually, first payment due on signing." She paused. "The signing is done. The payment is in the trust account." I looked out the window at the place where the crow had been. "Good," I said. I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment after we finished. $94,000 annually. 12 years. 30 acres of valley land that Cresswell Brant had bought for almost nothing in 1961, that had sat tangled in an unprobated estate for 26 years, that Delilah had spent 11 years quietly unknotting so that I could receive it clean and whole and entirely my own. The numbers didn't feel triumphant. They felt like the conclusion of a long, careful sentence that had been started by someone else on my behalf, and that I had spent 6 years making sure would not be interrupted before it could finish. I had 3 days left in Japan. I spent them finishing the work I had come to do, eating meals alone with a book, sleeping without difficulty, and thinking very rarely about Wade and very frequently about the 42 acres outside Sacramento that had been mine since I was 22 years old, that had been Cresswell Brant's before that Delilah had spent 11 years making sure no one could take. On the last night, I went for a walk along the river near the hotel, and stood for a while looking at the lights on the water. The air smelled like rain that hadn't arrived yet. Somewhere nearby, someone was playing a stringed instrument very quietly. Not quite music, just a series of notes being tested. I thought about going home. I thought about what would be waiting when I got there. I thought about Delilah's handwriting on the envelope, her looping confident script, the way she had sealed it with tape in 2 places as if she wanted to be certain it would arrive whole. I turned around and walked back to the hotel. There was still one more thing Wade did not know about. Not the land. Not Renata. Not the folder. Something Delilah had told me to keep, and that I had kept, and that Gerald had recently confirmed was still exactly where she had put it. I would think about that on the flight home. I landed at Sacramento International on a Thursday afternoon, 9 weeks after Wade had filed. The divorce had been uncontested since the third week. Pulver had found nothing to pull, as Renata had predicted, and the proceedings had moved with a quiet efficiency that I had found appropriate given everything. I was living in a sublet in Midtown while my own arrangements settled into place. The apartment was small and faced east, and in the mornings the light came in flat and clear across the kitchen table where I kept Delilah's letter. The original, in its brown envelope, still sealed on 2 sides with tape, propped against the sugar bowl where I could see it while I drank my tea. Wade had sent one final message, 3 weeks after I returned, a long, carefully worded text that moved through several registers, regret, then justification, then something that was almost an appeal, and ended by asking if we could talk. The justification section had used the word ungrateful once, applied to me, in a sentence about how I had never fully committed to the life he was trying to build. I read it twice. I set the phone face down on the table beside the letter. I did not reply. The lease payment had cleared. The land was still mine. Gerald Fitch had retired in June and referred the trust to a younger attorney he trusted, and the transfer had gone without incident. The thing Delilah had understood, the thing she had spent 11 years making sure I would have the chance to understand, was that security is not something you build after the storm. You build it before, in the long ordinary years when no one is watching and no one thinks it matters yet. On the windowsill of the sublet, in a small clay pot I had bought at the Saturday market on Alhambra, a succulent I'd had since graduate school was putting out a new shoot, pale green, curved slightly toward the light, unhurried. If you've watched this story through to the end, share it with someone who understands that the most powerful thing a woman can do is keep building long before anyone thinks she needs to.